The scent of expensive French milled soap and the sickening sweetness of entitlement clung to the air and Alara's walk-in closet, a sprawling cathedral of couture, where individual handbags held more value than Clara's entire retirement fund. Clara stood holding a garment bag, the zipper catch snagging slightly on the aged fabric. This was not the designer gown Alara had requested, the one costing more than 3 months of Clara's meager consulting income, but something far more complex, a ghost from a life she had been forced to abandon. The silence was broken by Alara, 18 years old, genetically blessed, and financially catastrophic. She was scrolling through images of the upcoming Starlight Charity Gala, the social event of the year where her father, Julian, was being honored. Mother, stop breathing near the Balmain," Alara commanded, not looking up. "You're stressing the fibers." Clara ignored the swipe. "Alara, about the dress. You know the commission from Julian's company was delayed. The final payment for the Alizé gown hasn't cleared my account yet, and the rental fee for the diamond earrings is due tomorrow." Alara finally lowered her phone, her eyes, usually a soft hazel, hardening into chips of polished amber. "Are you serious? You're telling me that after Father got us invitations to the Starlight Gala, the event that solidifies our place in the city's upper echelon, I might have the Alizé? What will Penelope Montgomery say?" "You will have a beautiful dress," Clara said, pulling the zip all the way down. She held out the garment. It wasn't opulent. It was simple, constructed from a thick, matte silk blend, a rich, dusty sapphire blue that was meant to catch the light subtly, not overwhelm it. It was draped beautifully, featuring an elegant boat neck and a conservative A-line skirt. It was the definition of quiet luxury, if you valued timeless design over visible labels. Alara stared at it, her lip curling with such theatrical disgust that Clara felt a familiar, sharp pang of weary resignation. "What is that?" Alara asked, her voice dangerously flat. "It's a classic silhouette. I pulled the pattern from my old portfolio. I altered it slightly. It will fit you perfectly." Alara dropped her phone onto a velvet puff as if it had suddenly become contaminated. She approached the dress slowly, running the tip of a perfectly manicured nail along the hem. Then came the words that landed with the physical force of a slap, words Clara knew came not just from her daughter, but from the toxic air of the world Julian had built around them. Alara snatched her hand away as if the fabric were diseased. "Honestly, Mother, I know your finances are tight, but this is embarrassing. It looks like something a high school teacher would wear to a baptism. It's muted. It's cheap. It probably smells like mothballs and disappointment. This is what you wear when you've given up on life and have to pretend you're happy with oatmeal." Clara didn't flinch, though the exhaustion of years of this condescension was a heavy weight on her shoulders. She was 45, beautiful in a way that required effort and grit, but permanently eclipsed by the dazzling, effortless glow of her daughter and the overwhelming success of her husband. "It is not cheap, Alara," Clara stated, folding the dress meticulously back into the bag. "It is custom, and it is modest. Sometimes modesty speaks louder than—" "Modesty is the budget constraint of the socially irrelevant, Mother," Alara snapped, turning to face her reflection in the full-length mirror, adjusting a curl that was already flawless. "The Starlight Gala is where Julian confirms his IPO. Penelope Montgomery, whose father owns half the city's real estate, will be wearing bespoke Vera Wang. If I show up in this, I will look like an intern who won a raffle ticket. I will look like one of the caterers." She spun around, her eyes blazing with genuine panic. "Father would be humiliated. You are supposed to be supporting his image, not dragging it down with your constant need to play the struggling artist." Clara's jaw tightened. She was the struggling artist. Or rather, the struggling business consultant who secretly wished she was still the promising fashion designer Julian had married 20 years ago. When their finances cratered early in Julian's career, Clara put her dreams in storage, sacrificing her ambition so Julian could focus solely on climbing the financial ladder. He had climbed it spectacularly, only to forget that the ladder's base had been formed by her sacrifice. "I will figure out the Alizé," Clara said, her voice strained. "But know this, Alara, there is a difference between value and cost. You only recognize the latter." She left the closet, the words, "dress for poor people," ringing in her ears, a challenge and an accusation wrapped into one. Alara didn't realize how close to the truth she was. Clara was struggling. Their lavish lifestyle was entirely funded by Julian, and Julian's spending was controlled by Julian. While Alara lived in a fantasy of unlimited credit, Clara saw the monthly statement, the precarious investment risks Julian took, and the gaping hole in her own savings account. The insult, however, sparked something deep within Clara, something dormant and fierce. She was tired of being the silent, accommodating wife, the mother whose artistic talent was dismissed as a cute hobby. If Alara thought a simple, well-made dress was synonymous with poverty, Clara decided she needed a lesson, but not a verbal lesson, a visceral one. A lesson delivered in silk and starlight, one that would redefine everything Alara thought she knew about prestige, sacrifice, and her mother. Clara walked past the massive, unused formal dining room, heading not toward her home office, but toward the dusty, locked attic studio she hadn't touched in nearly 10 years. She had a dress to make, not for Alara, for herself. The Starlight Gala was 2 weeks away, and the air inside the Thorne mansion was thick with escalating anxiety. Alara had secured the Alizé gown only after Clara sold a prize-inherited antique jewelry box to cover the last-minute deposit and rental fee for the accompanying diamond set. Clara hadn't told Julian. He would simply have waved his hand and said, "Why didn't you just ask? It's not like money is an issue," completely missing the point that he never looked at the bank accounts and never seemed to notice the quiet stress lines etching themselves deeper onto Clara's face. Clara sat in her makeshift attic studio. It was a sun-drenched space, but layers of dust covered the cutting table and the industrial Singer sewing machine, making it feel like a mausoleum for forgotten dreams. She cleaned methodically, uncovering swaths of materials she'd saved from her final, abandoned collection, bolts of fine Italian satin, remnants of Chantilly lace, and, most importantly, several yards of antique, raw tie silk in a deep, vibrant magenta. She had designed dresses for years, specializing in intricate draping and historical reconstruction before Julian's company took off, and he deemed her work too time-consuming for a wife expected to host charity luncheons. Now, she was resurrecting that skill. But this dress wouldn't be for show or for commerce. It would be an act of defiance, a visual manifesto. She couldn't afford new materials. The sale of the jewelry box had just covered Alara's needs and the utility bill. So she started hunting. She went through every trunk in the attic, retrieving relics of her past, a tattered curtain from her grandmother's European honeymoon, rich in texture but water-damaged. A dozen antique pearl buttons she'd bought at a flea market years ago and forgotten. And most significantly, a collection of silk scarves Julian had gifted her early in their marriage, back when he still saw her, not just the roles she filled. This dress would be a mosaic of her life, a garment built entirely on repurposed memory and salvaged beauty. It would look poor to Alara because it bore no labels and utilized non-traditional materials, but its value would be immeasurable to anyone who understood the depth of the work. Julian, meanwhile, was oblivious. He was deep in preparations for his IPO presentation, treating Clara like an adjunct organizer. "Clara, make sure the seating chart places the Montgomerys next to the ambassador.
and check with Alara about the car. It must be the Phantom, nothing less. Image is everything. He'd instructed over his third espresso. Image is everything, Julian. I understand. Good girl, he'd said, as he already scrolled through a spreadsheet. He didn't even register the cold distance in her tone. The first week was dedicated entirely to the substructure. Clara began deconstructing the antique silk scarves, carefully undoing the delicate hand-rolled hems, a tedious process that required absolute concentration and hours of solitude. She layered the magenta silk with sheer, lightweight panels salvaged from the water-damaged curtain, creating an optical depth that shimmered subtly, a technique she called visible layering. The cost of the materials, objectively, was near zero. The cost of the labor, the expertise, and the sacrifice was everything. Clara named the project the Phoenix Dress. It would be her rise from the ashes of her old identity. She worked late, usually after Julian had retired to his study and Alara was FaceTiming friends about the necessity of avoiding carbs before the gala. One night, Alara wandered into the kitchen at midnight, searching for organic kale chips. She paused when she saw a thin sliver of light beneath the attic door. She climbed the stairs cautiously, her eyes widening as she pushed the door open to see her mother hunched over the industrial sewing machine, the needle whirring under a bright surgical light. The room smelled of old linen and new ambition. "Mother, what are you doing up here?" Clara didn't jump. She just lifted her head, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. She looked simultaneously exhausted and utterly energized. "Working?" Clara said simply, pulling a length of heavily draped fabric away from the machine. Alara squinted at the material. It was undeniably beautiful, a vibrant contrast between the deep wine-red base and a surprisingly intricate lace overlay that seemed almost metallic in the harsh light. "Is that magenta color from that scarf you always wore?" "One of them, yes." Alara walked closer, intrigued against her will. "What are you making?" Clara held up the bodice piece. It was impossibly structured, almost architectural, utilizing a complex inner foundation that gave it a dramatic shape without visible boning. "A dress," Clara replied, snipping a loose thread. "For whom? Someone you're consulting for? Please tell me you aren't sinking your own money into someone else's vanity project." Clara smiled faintly. "No, Alara. This project is entirely mine." Alara scoffed. "It's clearly some sort of costume drama. Look at all the busy texture. It's too much. It looks salvaged. Are you trying to sell it on Etsy?" Clara laid the bodice down. "If I were selling it, you couldn't afford it." "Please," Alara drawled, reaching for her phone. "Anything without a designer label is accessible. Now, can you get me those kale chips? And try not to stay up too late. You'll look tired at the gala, and that's just tacky." Alara retreated, satisfied that her mother was simply indulging in a niche, non-profit hobby. She couldn't possibly imagine that this project was connected to the very event she was so obsessed with. Clara sighed, running her hand over the complex weave. The lace overlay, which Alara had dismissed as busy, was painstakingly created from small, repurposed fragments of vintage lace tablecloths dyed to match the magenta base. It was a pattern of interwoven poverty and patience. As the gala approached, the stress on Clara became unbearable. She maintained her regular schedule, managing the house staff, coordinating Julian's social calendar, and attending mandatory luncheons, while dedicating every minute between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. to the Phoenix Dress. Sleep deprivation was her constant companion. She existed on strong coffee and the quiet hum of the sewing machine. One afternoon, Julian caught her nodding off while reviewing his speech notes. "Clara, honestly, pull yourself together," he snapped, pulling the sheaf of papers away. "You look dreadful. You have dark circles down to your chin. I need you sharp. This gala is crucial. People will be looking at us." I'm fine, Julian. Just a little late work, she murmured, rubbing her eyes. Late work on what? That little online consulting business you keep running? Just hire someone. Why are you stressing yourself out over pennies when I'm about to close a multi-million-dollar deal? It's important to me, she insisted, the lie feeling heavy. The consultant was important, but the dress was vital.
Julian sighed, exasperated. I wish you would just relax and enjoy the benefits of our status. You insist on playing this role of the overworked professional. Just be my wife, Clara. Look beautiful, smile at the investors, and don't look tired. His words, meant as a form of caring instruction, felt like the final thread of suffocation. He wanted a trophy, not a partner. He wanted the vessel of the dress to be flawless, but he didn't care about the genius of the woman inside it. This bolstered her resolve. The Phoenix dress had to be perfect. It had to be undeniable. She focused on the details. She needed shoes. She couldn't afford new ones. She found a pair of decade-old suede pumps, and using fabric scraps and industrial adhesive, she painstakingly covered them in the same deep magenta silk, ensuring the texture matched the dress exactly. She added a delicate trim of the repurposed lace at the heel. The accessories were the real challenge. The dress demanded something dramatic, something artisanal. She ended up braiding thin strands of gold-plated copper wire, bought from an electrical supply store, into an intricate choker, incorporating the antique pearl buttons as focal points. 2 days before the gala, Clara finished. She stood back, her body aching, her mind buzzing with exhaustion and triumph. The Phoenix dress was staggering. It was long-sleeved, elegant, and demure in silhouette, but the fabric was alive. The raw tie silk had an inner luminescence that seemed to shift with the light, and the interwoven recycled laces created a complex tapestry that looked less like fabric and more like beaten metalwork. The cut was revolutionary. Clara had always been ahead of her time, featuring subtle asymmetrical draping that seemed to defy gravity. It looked expensive because it was crafted with precision that mass production could never replicate. It carried the weight of hundreds of hours of focused, expert labor. It had no price tag. It was priceless. Clara tried it on. It fit like a second skin, molded to her form, emphasizing the strength she had rediscovered in the solitude of the attic. When she saw her reflection, she didn't see Julian's tired wife or Elara's poor mother. She saw the designer she was supposed to be. She saw a woman who still had ambition, still had fire. The night arrived under a canopy of stars that seemed deliberately orchestrated to enhance the glamour. The Starlight Gala was held in the city's grandest museum of art, guaranteeing an audience of both the exorbitantly rich and the aesthetically discerning. The Thorne House was a flurry of activity. Hairstylists, makeup artists, and hired chauffeurs navigated the marble floors. Ilara was a vision in the commissioned Alizé gown, icy silver, cut high to show off her long legs, dripping with rented diamonds. She looked exactly like the expensive, desirable commodity Julian wanted her to be. "Mother, are you ready? The Phantom is here," Ilara called from the bottom of the stairs, her voice tight with excitement and pre-gala jitters. Clara was not downstairs. She was still in her room, carefully locking away the remnants of the old dress and the sewing machine. The silence in her room was profound, the calm before the storm. When she finally descended the grand staircase, the movement caused a ripple effect in the fabric of her dress. Ilara was halfway to the door when she heard the faint, mesmerizing sound of silk sliding against itself. She turned back, intending to hurry her mother along, and the words died in her throat. Julian, who was adjusting his cufflinks, paused. He looked up and his practiced businesslike smile evaporated. Clara stood on the third step, bathed in the soft, custom lighting of the hallway chandelier. The phoenix dress didn't look like an outfit. It looked like a sculpture forged from wine and fire. The magenta was richer than anything off the rack, vibrant yet subdued. The interwoven recycled laces created a complex tapestry that looked less like fabric and more like beaten metalwork. The cut was daringly modest, long sleeves, high neck, yet impossibly sensual due to the perfect fit. The pearl choker, crafted from electrical wire and buttons, caught the light with an unexpected ancient luster. Clara's hair was swept up elegantly, emphasizing the dramatic boat neck. Her makeup was restrained, focusing on highlighting the fierce intelligence in her eyes. She looked powerful, regal, unknowable. Ilara stared. The Alizé suddenly felt thin, cold, and utterly generic. "Mother?" Julian managed, taking an involuntary step backward. What are you wearing? Where did you get that?" Clara descended the final steps, the silence absolute. She moved with confidence, born not of money, but of mastery. "It's a design I've been working on, Julian," Clara said, her voice low and steady. "Something custom. It's the only one of its kind." "It's unconventional," Julian stammered, instinctively touching his tie. He wasn't sure if it was good or bad, only that it commanded attention. He realized he hadn't seen this particular energy in his wife in years. Ilara, recovering slightly, managed a dismissive critique. "It's very heavy, Mother. Is that velvet? And the color, it's too vintage. You look like a painting. It's too dramatic for the Starlight Gala. It looks like you tried too hard." Clara met her daughter's eyes, a slight, knowing smile on her lips. "I did try hard, Ilara. Very hard. But sometimes when you try hard, the result transcends the effort." "Well, let's go," Julian said, regaining his composure. "We're late. Just try to blend in, Clara. Don't cause a scene." Clara didn't reply. She knew, with chilling certainty, that blending in was no longer an option. The Starlight Gala was an ocean of black tuxedos and glittering high-label gowns. Every neck was craned, every movement assessed, every label noted. The Thorne family's arrival was expected, given Julian's stature. They entered the museum's atrium, the polished marble reflecting the dizzying display of crystal and floral arrangements. Ilara, walking first, received immediate admiring glances. The silver Alizé was exactly what high society expected, current, expensive, and flashy. She smiled, already seeking out Penelope Montgomery, her rival in the social hierarchy. But as Clara followed, the atmosphere shifted. The murmurs that greeted Ilara quickly faded, replaced by a sudden, respectful hush that rippled through the crowd like a wave falling silent just before it hits the shore. Clara walked with a slow, deliberate grace. The phoenix dress didn't shimmer, it pulsed. The magenta under the museum's carefully curated spotlights revealed the complex texture of the recycled lace, making it look almost three-dimensional, like woven metal. It drew the eye and held it captive. People stopped mid-sip, mid-conversation, mid-gossip. Julian realized with dawning horror that his wife was not blending in. She was eclipsing everything. Penelope Montgomery, draped in her bespoke Vera Wang, a pale lavender confection, was standing near the entrance, holding court with a small cluster of heiresses.
She spotted Ilara and offered a saccharine, competitive smile. Then Penelope saw Clara. Her eyes narrowed, sweeping Clara's form, searching for a label, a signature design element, anything to categorize and dismiss the dress. She saw none. It didn't look like Dior, Chanel, or McQueen. It looked original. It looked singular. "Ilara, darling, you look divine," Penelope called, her voice slightly strained. "But who is that? I don't recognize the design. Is she one of the artists being featured tonight?" Ilara, who had been basking in Penelope's momentary attention, felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She hadn't anticipated this reaction. She had expected her mother to look dowdy, predictable, and budget-conscious. "That's my mother, Penelope," Ilara said, forcing a bright smile. "She's wearing an older piece, something custom." "Custom?" Penelope's eyebrows arched in suspicion. "Where from? I swear I saw that style in a vintage collection from Milan 20 years ago. Is it reconstructed?" The word reconstructed implied recycled trash. Before Ilara could reply, a renowned fashion editor, Miss Helena Vance, known for her brutally honest critiques and impeccable taste, materialized beside them. Miss Vance didn't look at Ilara. Her gaze was entirely fixed on Clara. "Good heavens," Miss Vance breathed, not to anyone in particular. "Look at the drape. The foundation work is exquisite, and the texture. It looks like she wove a tapestry of history." She moved forward instantly, a predatory gleam in her eye, zeroing in on Clara. "Madame," Miss Vance said, extending a hand to Clara, ignoring Julian entirely. "I am Helena Vance. This garment is mesmerizing. Who are you wearing? I must know the atelier. I haven't seen craftsmanship like this since Galliano's early days." Clara took her hand, her demeanor composed. "Miss Vance, it is an honor. I am Clara Thorne, and I am wearing myself." A collective gasp went through the immediate vicinity. "You designed it?" Miss Vance's voice was hushed with reverence. "And you constructed it?" "Yes," Clara confirmed. "The materials are primarily repurposed vintage silk and antique lace. It's my own technique, visible layering." Miss Vance didn't ask about the cost. She saw the value. She saw the sacrifice and the brilliance. "It's extraordinary. It's not just a dress. It's a statement against fast fashion. It speaks volumes about sustainability and true artistry," she declared loud enough for several surrounding couples to hear. This was the moment the energy in the room shifted entirely. Julian's IPO and his business success became background noise. The focus was entirely on the woman in the magenta creation. The murmurs began again, but this time they were not dismissive. They were admiring and curious and profoundly envious. The woman who had been dismissed as the tired wife was suddenly the most fascinating person in the room. Ilara stood paralyzed. Her $1 million gown felt like cheap bunting. She had spent weeks agonizing over labels, cost, and prestige, only to be utterly overshadowed by a creation her mother had made from what Ilara had mocked as poor people's scraps. Her mind reeled. She realized too late what custom meant when it came from her mother's hands. It meant expertise. It meant genius. And she had dismissed that genius as a dusty hobby. She looked at Penelope, who was now staring at Clara with naked, furious jealousy. Penelope's expensive, label-laden dress suddenly looked mass-produced and predictable. The humiliation was instant and total. It wasn't just that Clara looked better. It was that Clara had solved the problem of looking important without relying on the very currency Elara worshipped. The room spun. The reality of her mother's sacrifices slammed into her with brutal force. Clara had sold her grandmother's jewelry box so Elara could wear the Alizé. Clara had spent hundreds of unpaid hours designing this masterpiece, likely sacrificing sleep, while Elara complained about the quality of the house champagne. The dress for poor people had made her mother the undeniable star of the evening. It wasn't poverty, it was skill, and Elara had been blinded by labels to see it. She saw Julian approach Clara, pulling her slightly aside, whispering urgently, "Clara, this is spectacular. We need to capitalize on this. Who do we know who could fund this line? We could market this as a bespoke ethical collection." Julian, the eternal capitalist, was scrambling to monetize his wife's unexpected triumph, utterly missing the point that this was an act of personal reclamation, not a business strategy. This final moment, seeing her hypercritical, demanding father instantly try to co-opt her mother's hard-won success, was the breaking point for Elara. She saw the years of her mother's subservience, the quiet misery, the constant struggle to manage a budget Julian didn't acknowledge while enduring her daughter's cruel condescension.
Elara felt a wave of nausea, followed by a sudden, sickening lightness. The sound in the room became muffled, the lights too bright. She tried to take a step toward her mother, to apologize, to reclaim some shred of grace, but her body betrayed her. Her vision tunneled. With a heavy, silk-on-marble thud, Elara Thorne, dressed in her multi-thousand-dollar gown and rented diamonds, collapsed onto the polished museum floor. The ensuing silence was deafening. Every head in the room swiveled toward the sound. Clara, who had just been fielding an inquiry from a curator, spun around instantly, her heart overriding her designer pride. "Elara!" Clara was on her knees beside her daughter, ignoring the flashing phones and the circle of horrified faces. Julian was instantly barking orders, panicked about the spectacle. "Get security. Call a private EMT. Don't let anyone take pictures." Elara was conscious, but barely. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked up at her mother, who was kneeling in the dramatic magenta dress, her face etched with genuine fear. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Elara mumbled, the apology tasting like ash. "The dress, it's not poor, it's perfect." "Shh, it's all right, sweetheart. You just need some air." A private EMT arrived swiftly, determining Elara had fainted from a combination of stress, hunger, she had subsisted on champagne and anxiety, and profound psychological shock. They discreetly wheeled her out on a stretcher. Julian, mortified by the sudden intrusion of reality into his carefully managed evening, followed the stretcher, still trying to charm the EMTs into silence. Clara stood up slowly, the silence of the crowd pressing in around her. She was now alone in the center of the attention, the architect of both the evening's highest artistic achievement and its most dramatic failure. Miss Vance, the fashion editor, approached Clara with genuine concern. "Mrs. Thorne, are you all right? That was awful. But seriously, the dress is a triumph. What are your plans for it?" Clara looked at the gown she had made from her own history. "My plans?" she repeated, her gaze traveling across the room, meeting the eyes of every wealthy, judgmental person present. "My plan is to never underestimate myself again." She excused herself and followed her daughter and husband, leaving behind a wake of speculation and admiration. In the sterile confines of the private hospital room, Elara was recovering quickly, hooked up to an IV and looking chastened. Julian paced the floor, his face red with a mixture of anger and panic. "This is an absolute disaster, Clara. Do you know how much this will cost me? The Montgomerys saw the whole thing. My IPO is tomorrow, and now
Everyone will be talking about my wife's bizarre artistic statement and my daughter's breakdown." Clara sat by Alara's bedside, holding her daughter's clammy hand. She was still wearing the Phoenix dress. "The dress saved your IPO, Julian," Clara said calmly, startling him into silence. "People are talking about you, yes, but for a different reason. They are talking about the sheer brilliance of the woman standing next to you. They're interested in your brand because your wife represents artistry, integrity, and something truly unique." Julian scoffed. "Artistry? It's a dress, Clara. It's highly dramatic, I'll grant you, but it's still just fabric." "It is salvage fabric that took hundreds of hours to transform," Clara retorted, the weariness finally giving way to steel. "It is priceless because it is non-replicable. And I funded it by selling my grandmother's jewelry box, the only piece of family history I had left, because you keep my consulting accounts perpetually starved while my daughter demands designer gowns." Julian stopped pacing. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He stared at Clara, seeing the years of suppression and sacrifice written across her face. "You sold your inheritance? Why didn't you just ask me for the money?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Because, Julian, you don't understand money. You only understand digits. You see a number in an account. I see the value of a choice. I wanted Alara to have the Alizé because I wanted her to be forced to see the difference between what she values and what is valuable." Alara squeezed her mother's hand weakly. "Mom, I deserved the humiliation. I was awful. That dress it's me being forced to see everything." "It's not humiliation, sweetie. It's reality." Julian, however, was already back in business mode. "Look, this is salvageable. We capitalize. Clara, you start designing immediately. We call the line Thorn Atelier. We position it as ultra-exclusive sustainable couture. We can charge a fortune. This Phoenix dress is the launch piece." Clara looked at him, her heart sinking. He hadn't learned a single thing. He only saw dollar signs. "No, Julian," Clara said, standing up. The magenta silk swished around her. "I am not your new business venture. This dress was for me. It was proof that I am not just your tired, budget-conscious wife. I am a highly skilled professional who sacrificed her career for yours. That sacrifice ends tonight." She looked at her daughter. "Alara, you need to rest. I need to go home. But when you come back, we will talk properly." Clara left the hospital room, leaving Julian reeling and Alara staring at the door, her face pale, but her eyes finally clear. Clara returned home to a world that had radically changed in the span of 3 hours. While she slept fitfully in her own bed for the first time in weeks, the Phoenix dress had gone viral. Miss Vance, true to her word, had posted a detailed critique and analysis on her influential digital platform, praising Clara's use of repurposed materials and calling the dress the masterpiece of necessity. The headline? Thorn Atelier, the wife who stole the Starlight Gala with a priceless dress made of memory. By morning, Clara's name was trending globally. The specific, intricate details of the dress, the repurposed silk scarves, the lace tablecloth fragments, the DIY copper wire jewelry, were being dissected and praised. The story created a narrative of an oppressed artist rising up, using her wit and skill to overcome the shackles of excessive wealth.
Julian returned late that morning, having pulled an all-nighter trying to manage the press coverage. He found Clara downstairs, calmly sipping tea, fielding calls from major fashion houses, department stores, and even 2 rival banking CEOs wanting to commission bespoke pieces for their wives. "Clara, this is incredible," Julian shouted, running into the room, waving his phone. "The IPO is through the roof. People are calling me the patron of sustainable luxury. They think I supported this artistic statement." Clara set down her cup. "Yes, they do. And that's a problem, Julian." Problem? It's a gold mine. I've already contacted my lawyers. We need to incorporate Thorne Atelier immediately. You can work out of the Manhattan loft. We'll hire seamstresses, assistants, PR. You'll be the face. I'll manage the empire. You will manage nothing, Julian, she said, standing up. I have already hired lawyers. They are reviewing the prenuptial agreement. I am leaving you, Julian. The sheer magnitude of the statement rendered him speechless. You don't need me anymore. You have your IPO. And I no longer need you. I have my future. Clara, don't be ridiculous. This is a flute, a viral moment. You can't just walk away from everything we built. We didn't build it, Julian. I maintained the scaffolding while you climbed. I built this, she gestured to the phone, which was ringing with yet another high-profile offer, and I will take it with me. He watched her, truly seeing the shift in power for the first time. The woman in the magenta dress was a force of nature, entirely different from the wife he had taken for granted. What about Alara? He finally whispered, desperate. Alara is coming with me. She needs to understand what hard work looks like, and she won't learn that here, surrounded by hired help and zero consequences. Alara came home the following day. She was pale, quiet, and carried a profound air of shame, which was worse than any public reprimand. She walked straight to the attic studio, which Clara had left open. The cutting table was immaculate, but the industrial sewing machine still sat proudly in the middle of the room. A large framed photograph of the Phoenix dress, taken by a professional photographer Julian had scrambled to hire that morning, stood on a small easel. Clara was waiting for her. I hate me, Alara announced without preamble, sinking onto a dusty stool. I'm a horrible person. I looked at that dress and I thought, oh, mother's porn now. She's making clothes from trash. I didn't see the skill. I didn't see the hours. I only saw the absence of a label. Clara sat beside her daughter, placing a hand on her knee. That is exactly what Julian taught you to see, Alara. Cost, not value. The price tag, not the labor. And you sold Grandma's jewelry box for my dress. That was cruel, Mom. Why didn't you tell me? Because if I had told you, you would have offered to pay for the Elysee out of your allowance, and you still wouldn't have understood. You needed to feel the weight of superficiality, and you needed to see the power of genuine worth. Clara pulled out a small box, revealing the leftover scraps of the Phoenix dress, the raw magenta silk, a tiny piece of the lace tablecloth, a snippet of the gold copper wire. These were the materials you called poor, Alara. But the story they tell is rich. These were things I kept because they reminded me of who I used to be. Every stitch was me reclaiming my identity. And I mocked it, Alara whispered, tears finally tracing paths down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I really am. I fainted because I realized I was the idiot in the room, and I was wearing a dress that cost you everything, while you wore a dress that was you. Clara pulled her daughter into a fierce hug. You are not an idiot, Alara. You are privileged, and sometimes that looks the same as ignorance. But you have a good heart under all that expensive polish. Now we are going to fix this, not with money, but with work. Clara explained her decision to leave Julian and start her own company. But what about the house and the school and the credit cards? Alara asked, a flicker of her old panic returning. The house is Julian's. The school you can finish, but you will work for your expenses. The credit cards are gone. I am taking us to a smaller apartment near my new studio downtown. If you want to remain part of this business, and I think you have an eye for social dynamics in marketing, you will start at the bottom. You will learn the difference between cost and value by measuring, cutting, and stitching every single piece of fabric. Alara didn't hesitate. I will. I want to. I want to be the daughter who appreciates the genius, not the one who insults it. Clara established Thorne Atelier in a light-filled but modest loft in a refurbished industrial district. She refused all offers of massive corporate backing, insisting on maintaining ethical sourcing and small batch production. She hired 2 skilled seamstresses and a junior apprentice. Ilara started her penance. She was horrified to discover that work meant more than just attending meetings. She spent weeks manually unpicking discarded seams, organizing spools of thread, and sweeping the floor. Her delicate hands developed blisters. "You know, I used to think the dress just materialized at the store," Ilara admitted one evening, struggling to mend a fine tear in a piece of prototype fabric. "I never considered the hours." "Exactly," Clara replied, focused on drafting a complex sleeve pattern. "You have to see the work to understand the worth." Julian tried every tactic, begging, threatening legal action, and finally trying to invest. Clara rejected him every time. She used the large settlement from the divorce, which Julian offered quickly to avoid public scrutiny, to secure her independence, not to find a lavish life. 6 months later, Thorn Atelier launched its first small collection, inspired by the Phoenix dress, the Reclamation Collection. It was an immediate, critical success. The pieces were priced astronomically high, not because of the label, but because of the meticulous, ethical handiwork and the singular artistry. They became status symbols for people who understood that true luxury was exclusivity and ethics, not visibility and branding. Ilara proved to be surprisingly adept at the marketing and branding side of the business. She understood the social dynamics, but now she used her knowledge for good. She focused on telling the story of the materials, the process, and the hours of labor. She learned that a $50 piece of salvaged lace, transformed by her mother's hands, was infinitely more valuable than a machine-made $5,000 piece of silk. One afternoon, Ilara was negotiating the details of a new line with a potential international buyer. "The price is firm, madam," Ilara stated confidently, her tone professional and assured. "Each piece requires nearly 50 hours of meticulous hand-stitching. It's not just a dress, it's an heirloom. We are selling time, skill, and narrative. You can buy cost anywhere. You come to Thorn Atelier for value." Clara, listening from her cutting table, smiled. The lesson had taken hold. A year after the Starlight Gala, Clara and Ilara attended a small, industry-focused event. Clara wore a simple, beautifully tailored black silk suit, a Thorn Atelier piece that embodied understated power. Ilara wore an ivory cocktail dress from the new collection, made from repurposed vintage wool and adorned with subtle, hand-beaded detailing. They walked into the room not as the Thorn family, backed by Julian's wealth, but as the creative powerhouses behind the most talked-about sustainable luxury brand in the city. Julian was there too, still successful, but looking faintly diminished. Now just one more financier in a suit. He watched his wife and daughter from across the room, seeing the magnetic quality they possessed. He had money, but they had influence and respect. Penelope Montgomery approached Ilara, looking decidedly less confident than she had a year prior. "Ilara, you look stunning. Is that a Thorn original? I'm on the waiting list for one of the new velvet coats." "It is," Ilara said, her smile genuine. "It's made from 2 vintage scarves and a discarded cashmere throw. The inner lining is antique linen." Penelope's eyes widened slightly in admiration, not disgust. "The skill. It's unreal. Your mother is a genius." "She is," Ilara agreed. "She always was." As they moved away, Clara reached for Ilara's hand. "I'm proud of you, Ilara." "Thank you, Mom." "You know that old blue dress you tried to make me wear before the gala? The poor people's dress?" "Yes." "I found it tucked away in a trunk. I pulled it out. It's actually breathtakingly beautiful. The drape is perfect. I look at it now and I see confidence, not constraint." Clara squeezed her hand.
I saved it. Maybe one day you'll wear it. Not because you have to, but because you choose to recognize its true value. Ilara looked out over the crowded room, no longer searching for labels, but searching for authenticity. She had lost a fortune and gained a life. She had learned that sometimes the items with the greatest worth are the ones made from scraps, patience, and the powerful unseen genius of a mother who had finally chosen to shine. She realized she hadn't fainted from shame, but from the blinding clarity of seeing the truth. Her mother was priceless. Clara, in her simple, elegant black suit, caught sight of her reflection in a mirrored pillar. The woman who had been afraid to spend money on herself, the woman who had been dismissed as the tired wife, was gone. She was replaced by the designer, the entrepreneur, the architect of her own destiny. And she owed it all to an insult about a dress for poor people. The irony, she thought, was the most satisfying seam she had ever sewn. The value of true skill could never be faked, rented, or bought. It could only be earned.